Welcome, everyone, to September Marijuana Monthlies. My name is Chelsea Higgs-Wise. I'm the co-founder and executive director of Marijuana Justice right here in Virginia, and we are really excited to have our upcoming conversation. First off, I just want to remind everyone to mark your calendars because the Joint Canna Justice Coalition Conference is coming up in December. It's a virtual event where we are bringing speakers from a federal level to talk about what's going on with the in Congress and legalization and decrim, as well as what's going on in our communities to better repair our communities and make us safe. And finally, our third day is going to talk about reparations and that revenue. So make sure you are following at our website. You can go to cannajustice.org and see the dates there are December 8th, 9th, and 10th. They are half days and they are online. So make sure you are saving those dates and you can join us for more information about how to legalize it right here in Virginia, across the South, and across this so-called country. So I'm really excited again to have the folks here that you can see on the screen. And again, just reminding everyone, I know I usually do a little bit of updates of what's going on in Virginia. And to make it really quick and simple for everyone is that the hemp task force that also oversees cannabis is still having discussions, and they're going to have their suggestions out probably in the next 2 months of what the regulatory schemes and proposal could look like. And a reminder that it's going to look very different from what we saw back in 2021 and even last year proposed in the Virginia General Assembly. So we're going to watch out and continuing to let you all know how you can best support the work right here for communities. All right, well, that is the opening and the updates from everything that's going on in Virginia. So I'm really excited now to introduce the panel and allow them to tell you all a little bit more about themselves. So first, I've got Dr. Mariah Parker. Hey, Doc.
Yo, what's good?
Really and also thanks so much. No, you're fine. You're fine. And I'm also really excited to have on here Raiden Washington, also from Georgia.
How's it going, y'all? Thanks for having me.
All right. So, Mariah, I'll go right back to you. Tell us a little bit about yourself. Like, who are you? What makes you so cool down in Athens?
What does make me so cool? What is that rare sparkle that I alone have? So I recently completed my PhD in language and literacy education at the University of Georgia. Whoop, whoop. And so I'm very interested in continuing and strengthening my practice in grassroots political education, which dovetails with a lot of my recent work as an Athens-Clarke County Commissioner, working alongside Raiden and other community advocates to end the drug war, including decriminalization, but also reparations for our community. And in addition to that, I make rap music under the name Lingua Franca. I'm very excited to be going up to Chicago this Friday to debut a new song about how all debt should be abolished. And I'm just very, very passionate about not only getting reparations for slavery, which I think is like a main point in folks' minds of like that 40 acres and a mule, but like we also have the war on drugs to atone for. We also have redlining, we also have Jim Crow, we also have lasting inequities that we need to dismantle and build new systems that actually include and affirm everyone. So that is what a lot of my work entails.
I say that makes you pretty cool. All right, that makes you pretty dope. Yeah. All right, Raiden, tell us a little bit about yourself and the work that you're doing down there.
Sure, yeah. Again, my name is Raiden Washington. I use they, them pronouns. I'm currently a second-year law student at UGA. I'm also the chapter leader of Students for Sensible Drug Policy at UGA, the vice chair of our national nonprofit SSTP Foundation. I'm the founder of my own little social justice media organization, Black Market Media, and musician when I can squeeze the time in. I go by Storm Cadet. I have always been a fighter. As a kid, my parents put me into martial arts, and I was able to get second-degree black belt, trained as an instructor, and I just realized that I have a passion for teaching others how to fight for themselves. So I decided to go to law school to fight back against systems of oppression, figure out how we can have a world full of more peace and harmony, and decided to specialize in drug policy as a way of tackling the challenges that the groups that I care about face, everything from those who are marginalized due to their sexual identities, gender, race, ethnicity, socioeconomic class, things of that nature. So looking for ways to make our policies as intersectional as possible to help as many different groups out as possible and get us to where we need to be a little bit further in the future when it comes to how we live here in the United States.
Wow. Look, I was trying so hard to just stay quiet during some of these introductions. I really want to be like, yes. Like, so dope. I'm really excited to have y'all on. And it's been a while since I've even been to Georgia to see or feel about what's going on. But could you all tell us, like, what was going on in Athens to say, hey, we need to start this campaign around decriminalization? And do one of you all want to give our listeners a spoiler alert about maybe the big win and why I invited you all here in case they don't know?
May I do the honor, Mariah?
Oh, please. Yeah, take it away. The honor's all yours. This is a big win for you. So, and your people. So.
Yeah, no, thank you. We were able to finally decriminalize marijuana here in Athens-Clarke County just a couple weeks ago. So still riding off the high of that win. It's been a lot of fun. And since then, SSDP has also helped decriminalize marijuana over in Stonecrest, Georgia, which is the largest city in DeKalb County, one of our larger counties here in Georgia, also predominantly Black. So super excited about those wins. But as far as the history and how I got involved, from my understanding, the push for drug decrim here, or specifically marijuana decrim here in Athens, has been going on for at least 10 years, if not more. The SSDP chapter that I took over was founded around 2012 and was working closely with Mariah, Jesse Huell, and Tim Denson, a couple of our other commissioners here in Athens, to get that off the ground. I got involved when I came to UGA Law, and I was trying to figure out what kind of social justice attorney I want to be. I didn't know that there were like 1,000 different ways you could do that. I thought it was literally just like, oh, I'm going to go represent people in court who have been harmed by the system. But a lot of different nuances to how it works. So I decided to specialize in drug policy after having been personally affected by the war on drugs, from being a college kid that liked to party and could have easily have ended up in jail rather than in my parents' loving and safe arms, and just seeing friends struggle with it. But specifically at UGA, they didn't have anything going on related to drug policy when I got there at the law school, which I thought was insane considering drug charges account for more than half of all criminal charges in the system, and then of course affects people's lives outside of the criminal system as well when it just comes to stability and day in and day out kind of life. So I decided to revive our chapter of Students for Sensible Drug Policy at the university, got the help of some undergraduate students, and just kind of kicked the ball rolling, bumped into Mariah and Jesse, and they were like, let's go for it. It's back on the table. Mayor Gertz announced back in February of this year that he wanted to pursue new marijuana penalty options. And so we just used that momentum to keep it pushing and finally get the law passed.
Amazing. And Mariah, before we go on to you, how you got started in the drug policy work, Raiden, I see your shirt and you mentioned SSDP. Will you tell the listeners, the audience, a little bit about SSDP?
Sure. SSDP is the nation's largest grassroots organization led by the youth. We have a board of directors that is completely youth-led. So we oversee all of our national operations. We have chapters in every single state. Previously, we partnered with the international version of our nonprofit as well. So we were the biggest youth-led grassroots org in the entire world for a while there. And basically what we hope to do is end the war on drugs through some radical policy change, getting different movements going on from state to state, from municipality to municipality. But we're really targeting things like mass incarceration, things like the disproportionate effects on marginalized groups that the war on drugs has had, and finding different ways to combat that through getting the youth involved in local politics, local organizing, getting the community involved.
Well, that's right. So you just said that all 50 states have a chapter. So if you are listening and have never heard of SSDP, you can look them up in your state. And I'll just say I've been watching some of these young folks do some amazing work across the country, and I'm just really in awe. And since we're talking about the youth, I think this is a time too for us to shout out Virginia Student Power Network, as well as Rise for Youth, two of our youth organizations in our coalition that have been really holding it down with youth power and youth leadership. So That's just something that we really believe in, of our youth taking us into the future and really guiding us forward. So, all right, Doc, Mariah, tell us, how did you get into this drug policy work?
Well, I come to this work as a prison abolitionist, which is like a general set of guiding principles and theoretical framework that I apply to a variety of fields, domestic violence, gun violence, as well as the way that drug policy has worked and has not worked, or has worked for a very specific purpose other than its stated goal. And so I guess all of that began around the time I was running for office. I had some loved ones that were experiencing involvement with the criminal punishment system, and using that opportunity as I was trying to process what was happening with that, kind of looking at all the dominoes that had fallen to bring them to that point in their lives where they are now incarcerated. And so applying that framework of, understanding what these systems are truly for. They're systems of social control that have been adapted in order to dispose of unwanted elements of society. Black people, Indigenous folks, Latinx folks, immigrants, and on and on and on. And so with regards to drug policy, learning more and more about the ways that drug policy in particular was used as a way to round up folks, starting before I was even born, but even today in my capacity as county commissioner, accessing data on what we were doing as a local drug task force and things like that, to understand how even if people want to say that, oh, I'm against the war on drugs, I'm against mass incarceration, like, well, what does that really mean in practice? What are we not actually taking a close look at in our own communities, not just thinking, oh, this is something that happens somewhere else that's a horrible shame, but looking at the data, hearing the stories from families in our communities who, I have folks call me who say they are, their husband's in jail and she's in debt to call him in jail because of our for-profit telecoms company, or, oh, it's 3 days before Christmas, we have to post bond for $1,500 to get my husband out. And that is a child's Christmas that is, ruined by something like that. And so as a commissioner, putting the people together with the data to, create a narrative among the body for what kind of change needs to get made. And then being there to kind of do the, do the assist for the work that Raiden and folks in the community do. If it's being the person behind the rail in City Hall to be yep, they're right. I stand with them. Let's pass this.
Very cool. And Mariah, how long have you been in office? You said you've been doing this kind of since you started running.
Okay, yeah. So I got elected in 2018. So I served as county commissioner for 4.5 years.
Mm-hmm. And I mean, what even inspired you to run for office?
It's an interesting confluence of things. First of all, my commissioner, who had stepped down for mayor, had run unopposed for 25 years as commissioner. And then the person seeking to replace him on the commission was also running unopposed and was also a deacon at his church. And so I was look, I don't know much, but I love to learn. And this is certainly not democracy. So that was one thing. And also just I wanted to help. I wanted to make a change. And I grew up in high school, your civics education is just go vote. And here's your elected officials. Not to say it isn't a powerful position, but it seemed like an obvious way for me to get in there and wield some power for some good. So I just put myself up because I figured win or lose, people deserve an option, and they chose me. So I've been doing it. So.
Well, congratulations to you and to Athens. I think it's really dope that you saw the opportunity. And like you said, you basically have positioned yourself for a layup with the community when they have demands, when they have momentum. So it's really a strategic move that we see happening, and that you are maintaining the trust of those that are continuing to vote you in. So that's something that we are also just really looking at as a model. So you all got into decrim. You all saw this as an issue. I think, Raiden, you had mentioned a little bit about the arrest, and drug arrests were over half of the arrest in the state, I believe. Could either of you all give us just a little bit more about the problem of prohibition and any data or stats that you have of why this was important for this narrative to come for decrim.
Yeah, I'd be happy to speak to that. And so I think that because I felt that before I came on, the commission was somewhat of a rubber stamp committee. And so folks weren't really looking deeply at a lot of the things that the police department were doing and who was ending up in our jails. And it was revealed that like 70% of folks that were being arrested by our local drug task force were African American, despite the fact that we know that Black and white people use and sell drugs at very similar rates. And they were including in their metrics for success for the drug task force program how many marijuana arrests they were making.
Quick pause for the cause. And Raiden, we'll start that one back. But do you know how the population of Black folks for Athens? Like, what's the rate for Black folks?
I'm actually not sure off the top of my head. I do have some other numbers I can give you, and I'd be happy to look that one up. But when I said over half arrests, that was the national number. Some data that I'm familiar with is back in 2018 when the Georgia Hemp Farming Act was passed that basically made marijuana possession misdemeanor charges non-prosecutable. Do you want me to pause for a sec?
We can keep going. I think Mariah's going to jump back on. Yep.
Okay, cool. Just wanted to double check. So in 2018, Georgia passed the Hemp Farming Act that basically made it legal to grow and sell hemp products. As I'm sure you know, and as the listeners probably know, hemp and marijuana, same plant, same cannabis plant. The difference being what the government defines as how much THC is in it. So the Hemp Farming Act made up to 0.3% of Delta-9 THC permissible in hemp products to be sold as legal hemp, and then anything above that is illegal cannabis. So because of that, when law enforcement were in the field, they weren't able to efficiently distinguish between hemp and cannabis if they were to catch someone with some sort of marijuana product on them. So it made it really hard to prosecute it because they didn't have any evidence at the time of the alleged crime of if it even was cannabis. But the issue with that is they could still arrest people for supposedly having cannabis on them, even if it was completely legal hemp. And as you all know, arrest can lead to a life of just disaster of people getting stuck in the system, getting sucked back in through parole, and eventually ending up in prison, having a lack of access to things like housing benefits, education, job opportunities. And so in 2018, even though that law was passed, Georgia arrested about 52,000 people for marijuana possession, which was roughly 40% of the population of Athens. That year, we had the fifth highest marijuana possession arrest rate in the entire nation. What were some other crazy things? As Mariah said, and ACLU published a press release about this. Black and white Americans use marijuana at about the same rates, but Black Georgians are 3 times more likely to be arrested for marijuana possession than our white counterparts. The Latinx community, I think, makes up about, I think it was around 13% of our marijuana possession imprisonment rates, despite being nowhere near that high when it comes to national population percentage. There's also a higher likelihood for people in the 2S LGBTQIA plus community to be arrested for marijuana possession because queer youth in particular report very high rates of suicidal ideation, of depression, of mental health conditions, leading to marijuana use, leading to possible criminalization. And I think they are 30% more likely than their straight or gender conforming counterparts to experience assault while they're in prison. Then there's also like people in the veterans community, for example, of looking for a safe alternative to opiates after being prescribed legally opiates for something they might have experienced during their service, and turn to marijuana can get arrested for that too. There's parents that try to treat their kids legally in states with marijuana tinctures, for example, for things like epileptic seizures, and then they can bring their kids back to a state like Georgia where marijuana is illegal. They have to go to the hospital for some reason. Their kid shows up with marijuana in the system. Now the parents getting their kid taken away, the kids in the foster system. That's just a whole mess of now their life's completely ruined because our foster system sucks. So there's just so many communities that are impacted by this like one area of law. It's crazy, and a lot of it does circle around criminalization, but a lot of it also deals with how it impacts your capability just to live day to day. Of can't get a job if you have marijuana in your system. Might not get benefits because you have marijuana in your system. So there's a lot of different ways to look at it.
Thank you for that. I mean, you are really describing the collateral consequences that mirror across the nation in each state. Thank you also for bringing up the queer impact and that type of prison experience, jail experience, incarceration experience that takes people's minds a little bit further than just that initial arrest that they see as the consequence as well. I tell folks all the time that this is absolutely a prison abolition issue. It's a prison reform issue, however you want to show up for that drug policy is part of that. Mariah, I know you had a little technical issues, but I want to invite you to just continue what you were speaking about some of the data that's really drawn this from Athens in Georgia.
Well, I think actually it's really important as well, because Raiden did such an incredible job of kind of laying out the numbers of who is impacted disproportionately. But then thinking in terms of narrative and the ways that the war on drugs is being wielded to reinforce beliefs about certain kinds of people, we were also seeing a very huge media push for a linkage between marijuana use and organized crime, or to forward the idea of how pervasive that is in the community. Particularly, you would see a group of kids, literally 16, 17, 18 years old, who would get found with some weed, and one of them would have a gun. And suddenly this is being put out in a police press release as like, oh, we crack down on this horrible gang activity. And it's like, kids smoke weed, young folks smoke weed, and guns are proliferate in our society. And so nonetheless, even though we know that marijuana is a fairly safe plant to use, and we know that historically the ways that this war on drugs has been used to dispose of young people of a variety of marginalized backgrounds, nonetheless, this narrative is still being forwarded by use of marijuana as this cudgel to say, like, you all are involved in a gang, you all are up to no good, patting ourselves on the back as a police department for getting these young thugs off the street. When at the end of the day, folks are in possession of a plant that 70% of Americans or more think should be legal.
Right. And you bring up a really great point that, we look at the numbers that stand out very directly, and then we also look at the narratives that are created historically and then continuing through these numbers and continuing through the criminalization. One thing that we say a lot is just because it's current doesn't mean it's new. And so just reminding folks that this is an ongoing drug war narrative that we are fighting. Just to lift up a couple of things that both of you all have said. Raiden mentioned earlier about hemp and marijuana, and it really being impossible to distinguish between the two by the eyeball. And so if you want to go over to one of our partners, the BFC Partners Black Freedom Collective, it is Emancipate NC. They're in North Carolina. They are leading a campaign right now. For all of you listening, and you can see about that campaign, it's called don'tpleadtoweed.com. And it basically gives you what to say to law enforcement to keep you safe so that you don't tell on yourself, because you have to make them prove that it's hemp, that it's marijuana, and that it's illegal. So that's just some things that Black folks, Black abolitionists are doing out there to keep them safe. And then another thing I wanted to lift up that both of you all mentioned, I think, is the ACLU Tale of Two Countries report that's Black and white that really gives the racial disparities per state. It came out in April 2020 on 420. It was cute. But really, each state can look up their data and they can see how much more Black folks are being criminalized than white folks, knowing as well that white people and Black people use this drug the exact same. Something that's also really important to mention is that we are talking about, marginalized people, but most of the data specifically is talking about Black people. And that is really just because of how data is collected and what and who we have access to right now, knowing that a lot of immigrant populations, Latinx populations right now are not captured accurately in our systems. And so whenever we are talking about the data, knowing who we are talking about, that the data shows, and maybe who the data isn't including, and why we need to lift them up as well. So just putting that out for people of other references that they can check out as they are listening to you all. Okay, so now I'd really just like to hear a little bit about the fight for decrim, and then what else were you all pushing for when you brought this? We need no penalties. Oh, well, tell us exactly, what does decrim mean in Akron? Because that's something we've learned and seen, that decriminalization can mean a whole lot of different things depending on where you are. So first, tell us, what does decrim mean in Akron? I mean, in Athens.
Hopefully it means it in Akron too, everywhere, while we wait for Joe Biden to pick up that pen and reschedule. We in Athens actually, so in addition from shifting the penalty for a misdemeanor amount of marijuana, so less than an ounce, from threatened punishable by jail time to strictly punishable by a fine. We also have the lowest fine for marijuana in the state of Georgia, so it's $35. And it is $35 because we had originally pushed for $1, the very least, the minimum. And unfortunately, because the prison industrial complex thrives on making money off of people it criminalizes, there are various pension funds for law enforcement, etc., that people have to, by state law, pay into if they even commit a misdemeanor of this kind. So $35 is the lowest amount that we could make it in the state. But I think it's really important to highlight because this is how the system keeps itself going. Not only that narrative craft of like, look how important we are to the safety of our community because there's these kids out here smoking weed that have a gun. But also, we really need this to be decriminalized. We need some kind of money from these people who aren't really doing anything wrong. So let's make sure they still have to pay $35.
Yeah. And I just really want to jump in really quickly for people that are listening in Virginia. This is exactly how Virginia works. We don't have necessarily a minimum, but the fines and fees, particularly from marijuana possession and decrim that happened in 2020, it goes straight to the sheriff and prosecutors' budgets, y'all. So the money they collect from us in Virginia helps fund prosecutors. So the more they prosecute, the more money they get, which is a complete contradiction of keeping us safe, right? But anyway, I just wanted to jump that in and highlight that happens right here at our home as well.
Got to make sure they have the resources they need to persecute people for weed so that they can get the resources they need. Obviously.
Obviously.
Raiden, is there anything else you want to add? I think that's like the high level, what went down at our last voting meeting.
Yeah, another thing I'm really excited about that we were able to get pushed through was the definition of cannabis in the ordinance itself. So initially they were just looking at what people typically think of when they think of weed was the actual flower bud itself. But we were able to get the definition expanded to what another municipality here in Georgia uses, Doraville, not only including the flower form, but any seeds, concentrates, extracts, anything that's like not a felony type of marijuana is included. So if your buddy just so happens to know you some like linguist or something like that, like you'll be good to go so long as it's under an ounce. So that's awesome. As far as what we weren't able to include, or what decrim isn't, it's not legalization. So it's still a criminal charge if you possess a misdemeanor amount of marijuana. But again, the difference is, as Mariah highlighted, that you're no longer going to jail for it. You just have to pay that fine. And hopefully that's a much lower barrier for people to get past than having that arrest record. We were hoping that if they were going to collect any penalty fees, that could be reinvested into community harm reduction education to make our communities a little bit safer so people have more consensus awareness around what drugs are, what to look out for, how to reduce harm if you decide to consume them, testing kits, things of that nature. That didn't happen. We were also hoping for, sorry, I have my list right here. We wanted to release or at least restrict records of anyone that was in prison due to marijuana possession. Right now, we're fighting for anyone that has a drug possession record in general for them to be released and their records restricted. There's some state law red tape around that. Apparently, there's limits on how far back the commission can go if they are going to help anyone get out of jail or restrict their records. So unfortunately, I think the time limit on that might be something we won't be able to get around without changing the state law, which is also something that we're pushing for down the road. I can talk about that later. And then the last thing was requiring scientific testing to prove that people actually had that above 0.3% THC amount of cannabis on them, and that they didn't just have legal hemp that they're getting pulled over for. So to require that for use as probable cause before law enforcement searched or seized anything on their persons. Because a lot of times, like, we have one of our chapter members got pulled over for what the cop claimed was weed in her car. She didn't actually have any weed in her car, but they did find a lot of other drugs. And so now she's looking at like 7, I think, felony charges. And this is like a junior in college that, you know, is on her way to lead a productive life and now has to literally worry about a court case on top of classes. So we're trying to prevent stuff like that from happening by making the cops prove that, again, it's actually cannabis that they're pursuing, since hemp both smells and looks and tastes like cannabis. So without that scientific testing, there's really no way to prove that it's not a legal product.
And thank you for bringing that up. And I'm going to just repeat what you said one more time, that there is no scientific way to prove the difference without this type of testing. In Virginia and New Jersey and a lot of different states, y'all, as folks are talking about legalizing, they're bringing up what they are calling extra money for cops as drug recognition experts, DREs. They actually put in an extra $1 million here in Virginia because they know for sure that there's no way to test it. They are now saying that cops can recognize it with certain training. That is not true. It's just more money to cops. And it's also because Virginia, we passed the law that cops cannot stop, search, nor seize because of the smell of marijuana. And so now it's just another, we're putting cops through more to actually prove their work. And now the state and the institutions are trying to provide more money. So cops say that they have the expertise and they don't necessarily have to. So again, just really wanted to put out a warning for if you all ever hear about DREs, please stop them. And in New Jersey, they're doing something even awful. They are creating DREs, drug recognition experts, in the workplace. So they're encouraging your coworker to snitch on you. And they are saying they're experts to recognize if you're high, if you have drugs. And then, so yes, that DRE money is coming everywhere, y'all. So just that piece. And Raiden, really quickly before we move on, can you were saying that you restrict people's records. That was something that you all were looking and talking about. Can you tell us what that means to restrict records?
Sure. So it basically means if you were to have a marijuana possession charge on your record, you were arrested for it in the past, or I guess even now, if it was just a ticketable offense and you have marijuana possession on your record because of that, we were hoping to get the law positioned in such a way of, if that was on your record previously, that it would either be completely expunged, meaning they wipe it off, they erase it, there's no trace of marijuana possession on your record, or at least restricted to where it's technically still on there. But if like an employer was to go look, if a judge was to go look, if you were back into the court system or the incarceration system for some reason, no one has access to that information. Basically, it disappears even though it's still technically there.
Gotcha. Okay, so that's some different language that Georgia uses. If you're in Virginia, that's exactly what it sounds like to expunge or a record seal. To sealing the records is what they're talking about when they're saying to restrict the records. I like restricting the records because it's restricting from cops and other people from seeing it. Just that language of it versus sealing, it's just different. But okay, so you all have decriminalized it in Athens. You took the fine as low as it could possibly go.
Then you go. We went all the way down to the flow, baby.
All the way to the flow. I love it. I love it. And big congratulations to all of you all. And, congratulations on picking up the work that's been going on for a decade at least. Right. That's really the work that we have to be doing to see who's been doing it for a long time and how can we add to this movement. We would love to hear a little bit more now, like what's going on with the state of affairs in Georgia as far as the drug policy work and decriminalization.
I'll let you take this one because these fools at the state level, I don't know what the hell. Although, I mean, I could speak to some like cultural impacts of I think what's going on because it is still illegal at the state level.
Yeah.
But Raiden, I'll let you take policy first before I talk about what I'm noticing.
Okay, sure.
What's trickling down?
We're trying to get it to trickle down, because the crazy thing is, and one of the issues with even Athens law is it only applies to Athens employed law enforcement, meaning like our police department. So UGA police, the state troopers, state sheriff, anyone at the state level can still arrest your ass for weed. It's so crazy.
That is so backwards. I'm so
insane.
glad you brought that up, because like in Richmond, we have 5 different police units policing the city. And so that's a really interesting point for advocates to hear of, like, we've decriminalized it, but only for one particular department. And we have 4 other, at least, other departments
Right.
That we have to stay safe from. But thank you so much for bringing that up.
Yeah, the overlapping jurisdictions is crazy. And then also, Athens police can still technically abide by state law, if I'm not mistaken, if they so choose to, because there's that jurisdictional overlap. Right now, I believe the commission asked them to make it, what's it called, like a low priority offense. Yeah. They deprioritized it, so they're not supposed to be pursuing those charges at the state level, even if they felt so inclined just to like be a jerk. But basically, because you can either step outside of Athens and still get arrested as soon as you're like in the next county, or another police law enforcement agency can still arrest you here. We've been working with Senator Ramon, who took over, I think it was House Bill 165 here in Georgia, that campaigned to completely legalize cannabis in the state of Georgia. So we've been talking with him about basically pushing for 2 different policy campaigns, one for decriminalizing marijuana at the state level, and then one for legalizing, going for both at the same time and looking at which one goes further. Ironically, legalization got further in the past than decrim did at the state level, but I've also really been pushing for, we need to make this as intersectional as possible. And the beauty of a statewide bill, and the difference between like what we can do here at the municipal level, is a bill can attack so many different areas outside of just drug policy. So like one thing that I really appreciate that Commissioner Jesse Hill brought up during the decrim vote here in Athens is they were focusing on the fact that people don't necessarily just smoke weed for no reason, right? There's like typically a reason that's influencing them wanting to de-stress and smoke or consume this plant. And so we really need to look at how the historic roots of oppression are affecting people and how they're looking at drugs as a gateway of escape from all these day-to-day life survival challenges that we have. So I'm really hoping that the senators that we're looping in, and I think they're going to come down and do a panel with us at UGA Law. So something I forgot to flag, would love for y'all to stay locked in with us online. All of our events are virtual, so you can consume that educational content there, learn a little bit from our legislators themselves about what's going on. But basically, I'm hoping all the senators really consider looking at not only just drug policy, but how people's housing inequities, how things like food insecurity, economic insecurity, job insecurity, how all those sort of stressors and can lead to trauma that leads to things like drug use and specifically marijuana use. So ideally, we can loop in some affordable housing policies and in different ways to really strengthen us from the beginning in a proactive way, and then using the decrim itself or the legalization itself as a more reactive measure to, if people still decide to use that bodily and autonomy to pursue it anyways, that they have protections there as well.
Exactly. Thank you so much for bringing this up. My former clinical social worker self would love to bring up the word self-medicating at this point. Like this is what we're doing to survive, and this is how we self-medicate, stabilize. I tell folks, it's a stress reliever, but it's also a mood stabilizer. If we need to fucking laugh and be okay, that's actually a therapeutic means for what this plant brings. But just really wanted to also bring that to light and appreciate you bringing that up, because it brings us right to the cultural piece that is impacting the policy back and forth. So Mariah, what you got?
So I think what I'm starting to see is that in this patchwork of legislation, in this cultural climate where, overwhelmingly people support and are not concerned about, or people overwhelmingly are just not concerned about criminalizing weed as like a high policy priority or something they see as a detriment to our community. That folks with existing capital are starting to move in to position themselves as dominant in the market that they know is coming. So I know that you do a lot of work in making sure people legalize it, right? I think a part of our lasting prohibition in Georgia is such that under this patchwork, people in some hemp-related industries are selling products that contain Delta-9. And they know they have the audacity to do so because they are predominantly run by white men. And they're like, yo, what you gonna do about it? As opposed to folks who are selling marijuana at similar scale, but underground because of their history of criminalization of their communities. Mm-hmm. And so when you kind of hold the floodgates back, at the same time, there's some folks that are able to like push through and get their footing and get a head start because other folks live in fear of, given that criminalization they have generationally faced. And so I think that's a really interesting impact of, yes, this like weird layering of different things that cover different aspects of criminalization or create weird openings for folks to do certain activities and not others. Folks who feel empowered, folks for whom the law has always worked and benefited, are getting ahead. And so even if we were to legalize it just across the board without any reparative work, like there are some folks that are going to have an additional leg up than they already normally would, having accrued massive capital through not having it taken from you at every turn as a Black person in America. So that's why I really appreciate the work that you do to make sure we legalize it right, because if this is the case where folks are getting out ahead of the pack in this regard, then we definitely need to, as legalization, comes to the point where you can't ignore it anymore. It's going to be time. You're going to have to do it the right way, for sure.
And like you said, Mar, it's really important because it is going to come. Like at this point, we know that there's going to be certain actors that really push this. And this is why we love talking with organizers and people just to say, hey, when this comes, we can make our demands. And this is what it has to look like. And so many people with a leg up don't necessarily deserve that leg up. And a big way that we can help equalize, even though there is really no equalization, is by like really decrimming, is really repealing these crimes and the criminalization as much as possible. Because what you're saying is that the legacy market is going to continue to be criminalized. The legacy market are the folks that are underground. And as we are seeing in Virginia, but across all of the United States states that are proposing regulation, everyone, y'all, we are seeing more money for the carceral system, right? Like they are actually proposing more crimes to protect the investment of quote unquote legal drugs and quote unquote corporate cannabis, and continue to keep us out when we are really providing a service to our community. We talk about a cultural movement, right? And this is something I'm trying to talk to our legislators about right now is like, I mentioned self-medicating before. So a flower can very much be like our medication. And when we were having conversations about health insurance, we know not everyone just wants to switch their provider. If I've gotten comfortable with my person, I know what it is. It's just like that. It's a cultural shift that's going to have to happen. And people aren't just going to change their behavior only because the law changed, right? So we have to also just look at human behavior in this and why people act and buy and use their coins in certain ways. And it's also just why we're here, just to plug a campaign we've been really trying to get off the ground is Coins Not Cuffs. It sounds a lot like what you all were doing of trying to redirect that money that is collected back to our people. And that's what we really like to say is a great way to legalize it right, because whatever revenue is coming in, even if we can't necessarily get a license to sell it because it's going to be incredibly competitive, let's fight for hell like that for that revenue. Let's make sure that comes back to us, because that might be something that we have more control of versus who's selling it, unfortunately. And just remember, y'all, it's been a Black and brown person most of the time that when you're buying weed, that's who you're buying it from the last few years, right? So how can we keep that going, right? Let's keep that same energy.
On that note, Chelsea, if I can jump in really quick.
Oh, sorry, go
my bad. I have a little passion project I'd love to share with y'all. It's very much in the early stages, but I'm interning right now for the Athens Land Trust. So they're like a land conservation organization here in Athens, and they also help people get small farm businesses off the ground. And I was talking to them at their law student about how difficult it is to get medical marijuana growing, selling, processing license, anything related to either marijuana or hemp here in the state of Georgia. And basically, early research for me is showing that you kind of have to be buddies with the politicians here in Georgia to get one of those licenses. Not only is the licensing process itself really extensive when it comes to how expensive it is, but they have restrictions on, like, if you have any sort of drug distribution criminal record, there's, I think, a 10-year ban on you getting any sort of legal license. And so I'm just sitting here like, it really doesn't make sense to me that you're going to tell these brown and black people who got really good at selling weed that they can now not legally sell weed when there's a mechanism for it, and they have to wait 10 years before they can even apply. And then, like, I'm also looking at the law. It's literally written in the Hemp Farming Act. If you're caught with, like, if you have a hemp permit of some kind to grow it or process it or whatever, and it turns out that it's now gone from hemp to cannabis because of that 0.3% THC, if you've gone above that, you basically get 3 slaps on the wrist before they're like, okay, now you can't sell it for like 5 years or something like that. No, I think it's 2 to 5 years, depending on what kind of permit you have. But basically what I'm saying is it's really easy for people who have, like, they look great on paper to get one of these permits if they have the money for it and can, like, bribe the right politicians. But for people from low-income communities, for our BIPOC folks, it's really difficult to get those permits, one, because of the barrier of the cost of the permit itself, but then 2, the potential of their criminal records barring them. So I've been working with the Athens Land Trust to basically put a policy proposal together where we can have some protections around ensuring equitability as far as access to legal permits for people from marginalized and disenfranchised communities. And a big part of that for me is going to be pushing back on the state. We need to rethink this whole ban on, if you have a criminal record, you can't get a legal permit, because that just doesn't make any sense. If anything, we should be helping these people get, like, startup money, grant money from the government to start their own businesses, get over those economic hurdles of the financial barriers, because, like, it's already going to be hard enough for them to get a new job now that they have a criminal record. Why not just give them some startup money, help them start their hemp business, give them the license, and then allow them to legally do what you just incarcerated them for? So that's something I've been putting together, and I'm really excited about it.
Well, we can't wait to hear more about that. Please stay in touch with us about that. It sounds a lot like our Coins Not Cuffs and our equity program, that if you actually qualify because of your record that we had proposed and passed, and we got a new governor, and that is being very different. So please keep us updated. So I know that it is close to our ending time, Mariah. I know you got to get out of here really quickly. So I wanted to give you an opportunity to share really quickly what you have going on and how people can continue to follow and support you.
Yeah, I have so many irons in the fire, it's hard to say. But you can follow me on social media at Mariah for Athens, Mariah FOR Athens. I post a lot of updates on local politics and ways for people to get involved. Raising money for, like, reparative work, doing the work for folks that have been impacted by this generation's long war against our communities. And so I look forward to seeing you out there on the internet.
Yeah, thank you so much for being here. Okay, and Raiden, what else are you working on? How can we continue to follow the work that you're doing?
Well, as far as my personal stuff, I'm going to have my first official music releases coming out pretty soon. So definitely keep tabs on me, at Storm Cadet on Instagram, Twitter, most of the social media platforms, SoundCloud. And then as far as SSDP stuff, our chapter will be hosting all kinds of events. We have, like, in-person / hybrid virtual music concerts that we use as fundraisers. We have educational events. We're bringing the legislators through to talk to us about local policy. So if you are not in Georgia and would like to sit in on those meetings, definitely follow at UGA SSDP, S as in Sam, so you can keep tabs on what events we have coming up next.
All right. Well, thank you both for being here so much. My name is Chelsea Higgs Wise. You can continue to follow us at THC Justice Now or marijuanajustice.org, and we'll catch you here next month. Thanks, y'all. Peace.
See you soon.